Hello everybody, this is Albert. I hope you're doing well today. Today I want to do a video on what is tea? Where does tea come from? Tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world, but I think we don't really think about where does this thing come from? And if you look globally, tea consumption outweighs coffee consumption quite a bit. And one of the reasons is that tea is consumed daily in India and Indochina and in China and Korea and Japan and all these places where the common day in, day out person doesn't have access to something like coffee. Also, tea has been just so imbued and ingrained in these cultures for thousands of years. So what is tea? Tea comes from a plant or a bush called the Camellia sinensis bush. And this bush, and there's two varieties. One variant is the classic Camellia sinensis bush, and this bush can grow up to 20 feet if left unpruned, but they prune it to spur growth. And this plant is the tea plant, as we call it, the tea plant. So where does tea come from? It comes from this plant. And this variety is mostly grown in colder regions. So this is going to be like China, which is the largest exporter of tea, but also in Japan, in Nepal. These are all global exporters. That's the main variety of tea. And from this variant of the plant, we would get the classic teas, the green teas, the white teas, and a lot of oolong teas and various varieties of black tea. The other strand is the Camellia sinensis assamica. Now the assamica is grown in tropical regions, so this is going to be Kenya, for example. Sri Lanka is another place, and mostly these are going to be former British colonies, and we'll have a future episode why this is. And these leaves are bigger, and this variant of the Camellia sinensis plant can grow up to 50 feet if left unpruned, but again, they don't let it get that high. And so these are the two main ones. And from this assamica, we tend to get more of the black teas. And there's going to be future episodes why that is. Partly because the areas where the assamica is were former British colonies, and black tea, English tea, is very popular back in the homeland, so to speak. And so the assamica variant tends to have bolder, stronger flavors than the classic Camellia sinensis that's grown up in China and Japan. So that's tea. And so from the tea plant, the Camellia sinensis plant, we get many, but not all of the colored teas that we think about when we think about tea. So from that, we get the 6 main variants of tea, which, and we'll have future episodes on each of these separately, but this is where you get white tea, green tea, yellow tea, oolong, black, and the dark teas. All of these come from the Camellia sinensis plant, whether the sinensis variant or the assamica variant that's grown more in the equatorial regions. The only colored tea that doesn't come from this famous bush is red tea. So red tea is a color, but it's actually grown down in southern Africa, in the cone of southern Africa. And this is where we get rooibos. Rooibos is red tea, but rooibos is not caffeinated at all, and it's not connected at all with the Camellia sinensis tea bush that grows the other 6 major teas. So it is completely separate. So some people will think, well, all the colored teas come from the tea bush. No, they don't. Almost all of them do, but red tea, rooibos, does not come from the Camellia sinensis at all. So that's the tea bush. Now, how you grow this, in where it's grown, and how it is cultivated determines a lot of how this tea plant grows. And so this is what we call the cultivar. A cultivar is like a variation or a strand from where it's grown. So there's various cultivars in China, Nepal, and Taiwan, and Japan, wherever we're going, down in Kenya. So you'll hear, when you hear the word cultivar, just think of this is a variation. It's similar to like wine. There's a lot of similarities with wine and tea in this regard, where you can have red wine, but red wine can be grown in different parts of the world. And because it's grown in different conditions in different parts of the world, it's going to have a different subtle taste. And so that's what you hear the word cultivar. And lastly, when it comes to the tea plant, the tea bush, the high-end stuff's going to come from the buds, which is like the newly sprouting stuff. And from there, we get a lot of the high-end teas like gyokuro, which is like high-end Japanese tea. And then as you grow the more mature leaves on the bottom, this is where you're going to get like some of the oolongs come from the more mature ones, And then you look at something like Kokicha, which is a Japanese tea that is grown from like the lower parts, the more mature parts of the bush. And they also throw in the stems and so forth, and therefore the taste variety is going to change. So even though you can get different teas from the same Camellia sinensis plant, where you're grabbing the leaves, and then later, of course, we're going to talk about the main difference between green, white, yellow oolong is how they're produced, determines the taste and flavor and all these things like that. So in closing, tea, the tea that we all love, comes from the Camellia sinensis plant. There's 2 variants. And lastly, herbal teas are not teas. It's a misnomer. Really, the word tea should only be used for drinks that come from the Camellia sinensis or the Camellia sinensis assamica. That's it. So rooibos, and then if we look at the herbals like cinnamon, like lavender, like all of them, there's hosts like licorice, all these things. Those are actually called tisanes. They're tisanes. Now we call them herbal teas, but we really shouldn't use the word tea. But again, it's just one of those kind of like, if you want to be very strict with it, we should not use the word tea with any of the herbals. The word tea strictly should be used for the Camellia sinensis products. Guys, I hope this helps. Until next time, take care.